All right, well, we're moving on up, right? So let's look at, we just saw the medulla oblongata. Let's move on up here to the pons and a little bit into the midbrain as well. We're going to kill two birds with one stone in this particular chapter. And so the pons is going to contain ascending sensory tracts, but I want to explain it's also a major highway between the cerebellum and the cerebrum. In other animals that don't have quite as complex nervous systems, it will serve as a processing center. But for humans, it is more or less a relay between the cerebrum and the cerebellum, back and forth. All right, so there are both ascending sensory, descending motor tracts. And as I just mentioned, we've got pathways moving in and out of the cerebellum to the cerebrum and also into the spinal cord. We're going to see these cranial nerves. We're going to get into this in a lot more detail, but just kind of ease you into the idea of learning your cranial nerves, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Start learning some Roman numerals if you've never had to do that. And in this area is a major formation called the reticular formation. This is going to have huge effects on the operation of our brain, and we'll talk about that. So there are nuclei here that control all of those things listed. The pons in the light lime green here that you see is composed of these peduncles. We'll talk about those. These peduncle means foot, right? A foot, a ped in Latin or Spanish is foot. We'll see this open gap right here called the fourth ventricle. This will become a lot more apparent when we begin talking about the ventricles in the body. And the very important structure itself, the pons. So we'll be talking about all these things in this video. Here's the pons shown to you in the same set of 5 pictures that we had for the medulla oblongata. The reticular formation that has its underpinnings and beginnings in the region of the pons is pretty much if your alarm clock goes off in the morning to wake you up or whenever it goes off, then what's going to happen is you're going to activate this reticular formation in your pons. That's going to be a series of alarm bells inside your pons as well. And it will activate this set of neurons, a very, very old and ancient pathway that will fire and activate many regions throughout your brain. And you'll notice you can activate this thing via visual inputs, via auditory inputs, or via general somatic inputs from your body. Okay, so it's loosely organized. It's not incredibly well understood, but we do understand a lot about how it gets activated. And it's more or less kind of occupying those spaces in the brainstem, in the pons, that aren't occupied or used by other structures. And so it connects obviously within many regions of the cerebrum to get your brain moving. A lot of it has to do with reacting in accordance with surprising situations, right? We're controlling your heartbeat, your heart rate, so that you react again. Your heartbeat increases in accordance with the stimulus that's being received. It can reduce pain, and this is important if you were damaged or hurt, right? The alarm bells start going off and it happened to be an animal attack. You'd want to be able to ignore the pain that that animal has caused you by its attack and still be able to get away. And so that's why this particular system has a modulatory effect. It also controls sleep and consciousness, as you might guess, because its job is to activate the brain. So obviously it's going to have interactions with these sleep centers in order to consciously and subconsciously monitor what's happening in your sensory state. And it's also involved in a process called habituation. This is a process where you learn to ignore repetitive stimuli. You don't need to react to things every single time they happen, like putting on your shirt or something. Yeah, it's a little scratchy. Maybe it's not the softest material, but you don't want to respond to it every single time you move and go, oh, that's scratchy, because that's going to become distracting. You want to minimize distractions from stimuli that are repetitive. So we already talked about the derivation of the mesencephalon that is also known as the midbrain. The midbrain is a very short segment in terms of the ones we've already talked about, the medulla oblongata and the pons, and it contains what's known as the cerebral aqueduct, which we'll talk a little bit more about when we discuss the circulatory pattern of cerebral spinal fluid. And here is the midbrain in 5 shots, not quite the exact same ones these 3 are, but we alter these 2 because now we're starting to penetrate into the depths of the brain. So you can see again a very short segment, and I want to highlight this region right back here, right? This is going to be the really interesting part of the midbrain we want to talk about. So the midbrain composed of the tectum. Tectum means roof, and just below the tectum is that area I was just pointing out to you. It actually is 4 separate bulges called the corpora quadragemina. The most superior 2 bulges are 2 nuclei called the superior colliculi, and then the lower 2 bulges are called the inferior colliculi. The superior colliculi get inputs. The optic nerves are exiting back from the retina and are going to send inputs to this region of the brain. So there is visual information received by the superior colliculi. In particular, they're looking at bright flashes and tracking moving objects. The inferior colliculi are devoted to auditory signals. And so they're going to get signals from your auditory feed from the inner ear, and some of those fibers will go to the inferior colliculi. This is to process these loud bangs and loud noises, things that you should pay attention to. If you hear them coming towards you and you hear this loud bang, you're going to reflexively turn to it and deal with that oncoming signal. These 2 together, the inferior and superior colliculi, output what is known as the startle reflex. You see a flash of lightning, you can't help, and hear that bang of thunder, you can't help but be startled by it. It's part and wired in, it's part of your neuroanatomy, and it's absolutely a hardwired system that you have to react appropriately to things that could cause you harm. As we already mentioned, there are cerebral peduncles in the midbrain. Well, these cerebral peduncles or feet are the lower regions of the cerebrum, and they're where the pathways for fibers coming from the cerebrum and going to the cerebrum are going to be passing through. And so the cerebellum will be connecting via these peduncles. The substantia nigra is a darkened region. We'll see a picture of a slice here in a second in the midbrain. And the substantia nigra is where a lot of movement actions, purposeful movement, is figured out and accomplished. So we'll initiate those signals within the substantia nigra. And the tegmentum is an area, a very complex area, where there are several nuclei located. Some of them are incredibly essential to the function of the brain. I would get more into these if this was a more dedicated neuroanatomy class, but for now, just understand that it's part of the midbrain and it is absolutely essential part of the midbrain. So here we see a slice through the midbrain, through the mesencephalon, and we can see the substantia nigra. It appears to be darker than the surrounding white material. If it's stained in a particular way, it appears very dark in comparison to that surrounding area. We see the aqueduct that carries cerebrospinal fluid, and then back here all the bulges of the superior colliculus.